welcome back, and now we will continue our lecture to the DSS characteristics at this point. So, if you look into the slides, we have already discussed what is an EDP, transaction processing system, and how did this evolve to an MIS. And from now the MIS, we now talk about the DSS, the characteristics of the DSS. Okay. So, the main aspects of DSS is that DSS access data from variety of sources. Okay. So, different sources and you collect different type of data. So, the first aspect of it is different databases. Okay. And second aspect is different departments. Okay. So, let us talk about this aspect at this point, where I have let us say you are the MD or managing director or CEO of a particular company, and you have, let us say, production department, you have sales, you have marketing, you have finance, okay, and you have HR. Let us say this many departments are available in front of you. These are all individual departments. Okay. Department and department. Each one of them will have their own database. Okay. And you would pull their data from their own database. Okay. This diagram is a representation of the database, and from there you have a system which pulls data from all these databases, right. And the data of production department will be in one particular format, and this will be in another format. Okay. So, you are also pulling data from different databases in different format for trying to find out, let us say you have some amount of money with you. Okay. You want to decide how much money is to be divided among these departments. So, you need to find out, you are trying to do the performance evaluation. So, you are going to make the decision of how much money to be distributed to each department. Okay. How much you are going to distribute to each department is something that you are going to decide. Okay. So, that decision from your side for each department requires you to look into the performance of the department from different databases, collect them together and do the performance evaluation for each department in your own ways, and then decide, rationally decide. Okay. The rational decision is this amount. Okay. This has to be rationally decided. No favoritism, nothing of the sort, just based on data and other kind of things, right. So, what happens is this decision process, okay, is usually, okay, less well structured. Up to this point, your EDP and MIS, this is well structured, and MIS was also well structured. Whereas, the DSS level, it is less well structured, it is not very well structured. Okay. And the problem is mostly unspecified. Unspecified in a sense, the details are not well spelled out. Okay. You do not know the exact details of it, or not all aspects are clearly mentioned. Okay. So, the upper level management typically faces this issue because their problems are very less well structured and they are very unspecified because the details are not very well spelled out. So, in that regard, what is the main thing? Your focus is on the decision. Okay. You are focusing on the decision. Okay. And such decisions are user initiated and controlled. Okay. So, who is the user that initiates and controls? Is the decision maker. Okay. Such decisions are user initiated and controlled. Hence, okay, the system should support the personal decision making styles of individual top managers. Okay. So, the system, because it is the decision making process is initiated and controlled by the individual or by the user or the decision maker. Okay. The user here is the decision maker, okay, is the top decision maker, and hence it is initiated by him and he is controlling the decision making process. The system should support the decision making style of the individual managers, right. So, unlike TPS and MIS, okay, DSS can't be too rigid, okay, or it should be flexible to support the individual top manager or flexible to support the personal decision making style of the individual top manager. Okay. So, then the DSS also facilitates the development and evaluation of a model for any given process. Okay. It allows you to develop a model and it also allows you to evaluate the model. If you are given any process and can you create a model to capture that process and go from there. So, usually the data is generated from processes. Okay. Usually processes generated data, and once you have the data, then you can use the data to create information from which you can develop model and then you can evaluate those models for that purpose. So, how is that done? Okay. The first step is you transform the enormous amount of data or large amount of data into information. What information? Okay, not any information, into information that helps, okay, that helps the user to make good decisions. Okay. You have enormous amount of data. The spelling of enormous is questionable. ENOR. So, this is not R, enormous. Okay. Enormous, large amount of data. You take that data and then you translate into information or you convert it into information, just not any information, information that helps the user or the decision maker to make good decisions. Okay. Then second part is, since you are able to model this, then you can say that modeling can take different forms. Okay. So, there are multiple ways you can model, okay, forms. Example, okay, in this case the example number 1, okay, simple aggregation is one model, okay, and number 2, sophisticated simulations. Okay. So, just take the data and then aggregate, just aggregate them, then that is one option, or you can just create sophisticated simulation out of it, right. So, and another aspect of this DSS is that if you look into the EDP or TPS, you look at the MIS and the DSS. Okay. These are the three things that we discussed in this so far. Okay. And if you look at the effort required for each one of this category, if you look into the angle of effort required, okay, the minimal effort is required for EDP and TPS, okay, and the MIS you require reasonable, okay, or moderate effort, and the DSS requires high effort or large amount of effort to realize or make these decisions in the appropriate fashion. So, the DSS in a way is something that is an evolution of MIS, but with the intention of getting relevant information from different databases, different departments, different sources, and in different forms, bring it together to one place, collate it in such a way that the decision maker, the top level decision maker, can look into it. So, the decision making process in the DSS is initiated and controlled by the top level decision maker. So, allow for his or her personal style of decision making and create information that is relevant to that person to make rational or good or effective decisions. So, I really hope that you understand how the DSS becomes a has evolved from the transaction processing system to what we call as a through MIS to a DSS. Okay. So, the second part of DSS characteristics, we just mentioned about some characteristics. If you look into the slides with the second set of characteristics in DSS, okay, it provides a good user interface. Okay. So, we need to compare this with the MIS, but the good user interface which will allow for easy navigation and interaction for the users. Okay. Easy navigation and interaction. So, the user interface is intended to provide good user experience. Why is this very important in the DSS? Okay. In the MIS field, okay, one major assumption is that the middle manager is tech savvy, okay, which means the middle manager is not technologically challenged. He is capable of handling, learning and handling technological. So, the user interface need not be too simple, whereas the good user interface for the DSS is intended or towards the top decision maker, we are talking about the top decision maker, and who is assumed to be not much tech savvy. Even though this assumption need not be true recently, but earlier this decision or this assumption is holds good. Okay. So, with this, then what happens is the major aspect is, okay, specific focus on features that make the DSS easy to use for a non-computer person, okay, in an interactive mode. Okay. So, a non-computer person is the critical aspect here. A person who is really not tech savvy or not comfortable with the computer, he in an interactive mode, he or she should be able to use the DSS, okay, or the DSS should have enough features to allow the non-computer person to easily use the system in an interactive mode. Okay. So, the thing is, because why do you need this? Because DSS focuses on open-ended problems that require modeling. Okay. So, for example, if I am a CEO of a company and let us say I am making cars and I want to figure out, I want to decide whether I need to invest $100 million in building a new factory which can produce more cars. That's a very it's a long term investment for maybe the next 5 years, which involves a lot of money and a lot of risk, purely because of the fact that I am going to invest in a particular technology, and I am hoping that in the next 5 years I will be able to produce so many cars from that plant that I can sell and I can make money out of it. That is what my assumption at that point, right. So, it is an open ended problem. I am not very sure whether a new company will come up in between and they will come up with a phenomenal new car which has a brilliant design, good mileage, etc., and then nobody will buy my car. So, that kind of a thing. So, these kind of decisions which are open ended. So, the person who typically makes this, if you take big business leaders, they might not be tech savvy, they might not be able to write programs, code or something like that, they may not do Python programming or anything like that. So, they would be dependent on a very easy to use user interface to interact with the system, to still see what will happen if a new competitor comes into picture, what will happen if the technology will change away from diesel or petrol to electric or to from hydrogen or etc. like that. So, all these aspects, these complicated what if scenarios need to be analyzed and appropriate feedback to be given to the decision maker to make sure that a decision can be taken with which will minimize the financial risk or damages to the company in the near future. Okay. So, if you take a look into this, this will require. So, to do this, what does this require? It requires the use of models. Okay. We can say analytic techniques in this. For the time being, we start with analytic techniques. We can talk about other aspects of it. Okay. And then with traditional data, okay, data access functions. So, in one way to think about it is models. Okay. It can be analytical models, it can be quantitative models, simulation models, plus data. Okay. And for this case, I am qualifying this data with the word divergent. Okay. I am not using the word big data, I am using the word divergent data purely because of the fact that data is coming from diverse sources. It is not diverging data, but I am talking about is diverse sources and the diverse formats, etc., all those kind of things. So, we are calling just divergent data, right, will give you what we call as the DSS support. Okay. Now, with this, what happens is the main aspects of the DSS characteristic is flexibility and adaptability. Okay. It should be flexible enough to accommodate different decision making styles, and it should adapt to the style of the decision making to accommodate changes in the environment and the decision making process. Okay. So, it should be flexible to allow different styles of decision making. Okay. That is a flexible, and adaptable to a specific style of decision making. By an individual. Okay. So, both aspects is critical for the DSS. These both should be supported. Okay. So, that is an important part. So, now we have seen two different characteristics of DSS. So, now with that, now let us look at the capabilities. Let us overview the capabilities of DSS in this regard. So, there are multiple ways we can do this. Let me try to do it in a diagrammatic fashion. Maybe we find space, then we will be able to do it. Okay. So, I will just use DSS as something like, okay, it starts with what we call as number 1, semi-structured or unstructured problems. Okay. We are talking about either semi-structured or unstructured problems as part of that. Okay. That is one aspect of DSS. Then we talk about the second one. Okay. 2 is it should support managers at all levels. Okay. It should take from the lower level to the upper level, should integrate, right. Then the third one is support individual and group decisions. So, the DSS should allow an individual to make a decision, or a group should also be able to use the DSS to make a decision. Then comes is the what you call as interdependent, independent or sequential decision making. So, it is like I as a decision maker, I make a decision, and based on my decision somebody else make a decision, that is called as the interdependent decision. Okay. Independent decision is as a CEO of the company I make a decision and that is it, nothing else. Okay. So, that is all done by itself. And then the sequential decision making is that there is a decision that is being made by one individual, and that decision results in another set of decision by another individual or a group, and then that decision leads to another decision, kind of a thing. So, it is a chain of decisions, that is what we call as the sequential decision making, right. And then the fifth one is support variety of decisions, decision making process and styles. Okay. It should allow variety of decision making process. People should be able to make different type of decisions as part of it, right, and different styles of decision should also be supported. Then one of the other term that we used earlier, adaptable and flexible. Okay. It should be able to adapt to individual different decision making style, and it should also be able to be flexible enough for people to make different type of decisions, right. Then comes is the ease of use, okay, user interface and result analysis. Okay. You should have the system should be very easy to use, and it should have enough capability within itself, so that the individual, the decision maker, should be able to use the user interface to make decisions, and the result should be presented in such a way that the decision maker can look into it and easily do alternative analysis. Okay. And the another aspect of it, the eighth aspect of it is emphasis on effectiveness and not much on efficiency. The problem with the DSS is that most of the time the decision making, the decision that you made, you will not have the right metrics in front of you. So, you may not be able to evaluate whether the decision made is very efficient decision or not, but you can reasonably evaluate whether the decision is effective given the current scenarios. So, you should be, the system should be allow you to focus more towards what you call as effectiveness rather than efficiency. Now, let us take the ninth aspect of it. Sorry, it is kind of like a really weird way I am writing this, but I think it will help you to do this. Humans control the machine. Okay. The main thing here is that the decision maker, the individual, the human being is the one who should be making the decision, not the computer. and it's not that you are checking a checkbox and say yes I agree kind of a thing. Okay. Then it is another aspect of it is ease of development by end users. Okay. As the end user, whoever it is, should be able to develop and add more features and functionalities to the system. Okay. Then I take the 11th one, we call it as the, I earlier said, modeling and analysis. It should support modeling and analysis, model complicated unstructured problem and do that. Or 12th one, it should also allow for data access. We mentioned this earlier. Okay. Complicated data from divergent data from different sources, it should be accessed. Okay. Then comes the next part, which is 13, is should allow for standalone and web based operations. If you want to use it in a standalone mode, then please use it. If you want to use it in a web based mode with different people integrated across global. So, this web based is usually to support global operations. Okay. Now, factories are all across the globe at different parts. So, then it should allow for global operations in this regard. Thank you.